So when we say Charlotte Mason, we're looking at much more of a whole child, a whole experience, contextualizing the knowledge. That's the influence that we would take away from it. Short lessons, the narration, some of those things are part of what we've got. And moving away from the traditional fractured education that you find in most schools. Because we love to incorporate the creator into all of our work, where creation inspires education. We study anything, math. We're looking at the intention, the design, the purpose, because we're actually putting in context. How hopeless to study from an evolutionary worldview that says it's all here by time and chance. Why? What difference does it make then? Time and chance can change anything, right? But that's not what we do. We study from a very purposed place in our education. Okay, if I want my child to learn subtraction and addition, we've already got the stories built into Math Lessons for a Living Education. So when they read that, then now I know what they're trying to do. They're not just making them read a story that means nothing. It's actually they're giving them context and application, like if we were building a car and we went and took a ride in the car, same concept. One of the problems with traditional education is that the habit of going to school and learning is where we do learning, and then when a student gets out of school, sometimes they don't have that habit, the curiosity and all of that to continue advancing and learning, where Charlotte Mason influence would be continued lifelong type of learning. Good Thursday afternoon, Mom's Master Books. As always, hope you're having a fantastic week so far. Hope you're having a good school year so far. Today is Teaching Tips Thursday. For anyone who doesn't know, my name is Randy, and I am the Vice President of Marketing here at New Leaf Publishing Group and Master Books, and also a dad of 9, and we've been homeschooling for a lot of years, over 20 years. 25 years. Graduated 5 kids, and so most of what I talk about in teaching tips is related to lessons we've learned, different things that we've come across that are interesting that may be able to help another family. Of course, as I've always said, in everything I say, 2 things: eat the meat, spit out the bones. If there's something you can enjoy and take and use, take it. That's number 1. The second is the Holy Spirit always trumps anything I say, and so if there's something that he inspires you with, awesome. If there's something that's like, I don't know, don't worry about it, just move on. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about we brag, Master Books brags, that we are Charlotte Mason influenced. A lot of our curriculum, Math Lessons for a Living Education, the language lessons, we say in our marketing that it has a Charlotte Mason influence, and sometimes there would be some debate. It's not as much anymore, I think, as most people in the market understand it, but there would be a little bit of debate from Charlotte Mason purists who would say, well, that's not what Charlotte Mason taught. And we know that. That's why we said Charlotte Mason influenced, because there are a lot of great ideas that Charlotte Mason philosophy had. Who was Charlotte Mason? Well, Charlotte Mason was a British educator in the 19th century, and she had some unique challenges. Children were still, this is the time of Charles Dickens, right, where we have children working in factories, a lot of orphans on the streets, conditions not ideal, and children were very industrialized, but they weren't seen as a whole person or a child. They weren't respected or valued like we would today. And so the educational method that were being employed in a lot of education, the philosophies of education were being developed. And so Charlotte Mason developed an approach that was, I would say, much more holistic, much more whole child, in that some of the things that you would hear would be, she would use living books, where she liked the child to, investigate history with creative ability and imagination. She used narration. So can a child give me back their use of the knowledge, not just check multiple choice A, B, C, or D. There were no grades with Charlotte Mason. She used shorter lessons, and she wanted to retain the natural curiosity that a child has and the quest for knowledge that is innate in a child. She wanted that to remain intact, so she would keep things very short. She would do a lot of things like nature walks and nature studies, music, art, picture studies, things that engage different parts of the brain rather than just telling somebody, here's a picture, this was done by this artist, he used this type of artwork, and then asking the questions. What's the picture of? Who was the artist? What type of brush and paints did he use? It would be much more investigative, much more, tickling the curiosities, if you will. And so that's something that Charlotte Mason is known for as well. She was big on developing good educational habits. So you have habits that habits are kind of the foundation of who we are as people. And so she would be bigger in that aspect of helping a child to develop good habits, because that's where we revert to. One of the problems with traditional education is that the habit of going to school and learning is where we do learning, and then when a student gets out of school, sometimes they don't have that habit, the curiosity and all of that to continue advancing and learning, where Charlotte Mason influence would be continued lifelong type of learning. Okay, so she's developing her philosophies, and she has some really good philosophies. Now, a couple things with Charlotte Mason. Charlotte Mason didn't have children. She was a teacher, but she didn't have any children of her own. Well, in the real world, homeschooling in the real world, sometimes it's a little bit different, especially when you're teaching your own child, right? So that's one area where we would say, great, philosophies doesn't always work when we're dealing with different personalities and in our own situations. So that being said, there were some other concepts that, like for Master Books, we are very adamant about worldview, about creation, the creator. When Charlotte Mason was developing her educational philosophies, the theory of evolution and naturalism was beginning to take birth, and so some of the philosophies she held might be different in those areas. I think with any educational philosophy, it's the same as what I said at the beginning: eat the meat and spit out the bones. We don't necessarily need to idolize a person. We have the ability to investigate for ourselves and then choose, accordingly. So, okay, real quick, I am just going to check, because my message that I'm doing on Facebook actually isn't even giving me any of the questions. So I'm just seeing if, hopefully there's Facebook options, although Facebook is now deciding it's a good time to have me okay, let's see. Apologize. Well, there we go. We're live. Got a few comments. Okay. Caitlin, Rosa, Anna Walter. Guys, okay. So, traditional education birthed out of the industrial age, right? We want, all of a sudden we have all these industrialists, and they want good workers, because if we're going to build an assembly line, we need people who know how to show up on time, how to do their work without question, how to look for performance-based rewards, and then go home and come back the next day. So an education system is built very much on the educational model. In fact, some would contend that's why we have school bells, because it teaches us not to really think, just to go to the next place. And so in an industrial age, We would show up for work, we would do our job. The professor would say, you get an A because you finished 25 items today, and now we're moving you forward and you know, I'm going to give you, you know, a pay raise, and you just continue to do that. Previously, education would be more apprentice-based, where you would find a child who is, you know, have an aptitude for mechanical, or maybe they were good at sewing and be a seamstress, or, you know, someone like a Benjamin who was a communicator who you could, you know, employ in newspaper work, and you would bring them in to be apprenticed and to train and to be very niche, which is interesting because now in the culture that we live in, we're almost going back to a niche culture because the internet has given us capabilities to focus on niches again. But so you have this niche culture. Suddenly we go into an industrialized education, and it was very fractured. So it was very much, you know, first grade you're going to learn addition, in second grade you're going to begin to learn multiplication, and in third grade you're going to learn fractions and decimals, and you're going to start going through this very fractured learning style that traditional education has. And when you look at the two, it's you know, they would take each element and break it down, and you just go to the classroom, and today we're going to learn about, you know, the Revolutionary War, and we're going to learn the dates, the facts, the figures of the Revolutionary War. We're going to memorize those dates, facts, and figures. We're going to take a test. If we get an A, a B, or a C on the test, we're going to move to the next element. And they don't really embrace, wrestle, learn, contextualize the material. And so we see students, they do a lot of busy work, they do a lot of studying and reading and answering questions, and they spend their time and they take their tests, and everybody feels good about that, but do they actually wrestle the knowledge enough to learn it, to internalize it, and make it their own? A couple of analogies that I like to use, I used one earlier in the week, if you were watching on Tuesday, is the puzzle. If you have a puzzle and I just took the puzzle for you and I dumped a 1,000-piece puzzle on the table. And I said, there you go. And then I took the box and I never let you see the cover of the box. And just said, you go put it together and let's see how it goes. It would be very frustrating because you would be trying to put pieces together, right? But you wouldn't really know, what am I building? When you hear your child say, why do I need to learn this? This is what they're asking. You basically have taken a 1,000-piece puzzle, dumped it out on the table and said, put it together, but I'm not going to let you look at why you're learning this. And they're asking, what am I trying to do here? What does this mean to me? What am I learning? In a sense, when we say, well, you'll need it in life. Okay, that's like saying, well, you need that puzzle piece. You got to put it together to put the puzzle together. It's almost cruel in a way, isn't it? That we do this with education? Because what is the end goal? How are we building? How are we training them? And so that's something that I think we have to be aware of as educators. Curriculum can only go so far, and I think Master Books, I'll circle back around, does an excellent job of a whole child learning. But as a teacher, we also have to invest ourselves in saying it's my responsibility to also help my child understand the context of the material they're learning. Okay, so we have this. In order to build a puzzle, what works best is to let them have the top, the cover, and the picture, and then they can begin saying, okay, I see, that's the picture I'm trying to build. Let me see if I can find corners, and then we build corners, and then we start building more pieces. Because we see where we're going, it starts to make more sense. Here's another one. Let's say I said, I'm going to train you to build cars. And so it's going to be a 12-year program for building cars. And year one, we're going to build carburetors. We're just going to focus on the carburetor. Here's a carburetor. I sit you down, I put a carburetor down, and I say, here's the pieces of a carburetor. I want you to memorize each of these pieces, and then where they fit, what they do, memorize it. We're going to take a test. If you pass that exam, we'll move on to the next level. You do that. Okay, great. Hey, you're certified in carburetors. Then I take the brake and wheel system, and I say, we set that down, and I say, okay, you're going to learn each of these components, and I want you to understand how how they work and function. Here's the components of this. And so you learn the brakes and maybe even put the wheels on and understand how the wheels work and all the intricacies of that. You can take the test, answer the multiple choice test, and what color is the wheel? A, B, C, D, D. We can do that. So we move into the next level, and maybe the next level is the electrical, the dashboard. We're going to study the dashboard, and we put together a dashboard. We can identify that's a speedometer. That's maybe we even know speedometer tells us how fast we're going. All these things. Okay, so we learn all the elements, the fractured parts of an automobile, and then we say, okay, congratulations, you finished all 12 levels of automobile assembly. Now you're qualified. We're releasing you into the world. Go build cars. There's no context. Even if they had all the parts and pieces of a car, would they have context? Because you taught them how to do a carburetor, so they can probably even, that's a carburetor. I remember that from kindergarten. Let's put that together. There's the tires. I remember tires. We did that in second grade. Here's tires and carburetor. Okay, what does that mean? If there's no context, if there's no big picture to put that information to, how do they know how to build a car? But traditional education does that all the time. Here's your scope and sequence, what you're going to learn at each level, pass the test, and it means you're successful, that you've actually learned something. And then we're going to move you to the next level, train you on something, and then all of a sudden you're going to get to, you're going to graduate. We're going to put a cape and a diploma, we're going to make a big deal, we're going to talk about how successful you're going to be as a car builder, and we're going to graduate you, and next year the next class comes in, you're out, good luck getting a job, because you have no clue how to actually build a car. Right? That's funny. Irina says, imagine teaching history out of context. They do it all the time. We jump in and we're like, here's American history. Let's study American history. Let's study the Revolutionary War. Let's study ancient history. That's one of the reasons when the elementary history U report course that I wrote is very basic. It's a world timeline, and we're working from creation to present day. And the reason we do it that way is so that when a child approaches American history or world history at higher levels, that they actually can say, well, I understand. I know where Genghis Khan fits into history. He's at least in the middle. He's not the leader right now of China or Mongolia. He was in this place of history. I understand where Abraham fits. When I pastored, and I grew up in the church, a pastor's son, went to a Christian school. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I could actually tell you the chronology of the Bible, that I could actually tell you, Adam, right? His sons, who Noah was, his sons, the importance of the sons, which sons, had the blessing, where David and Saul, where Goliath, where all these characters fit in. Who was Samuel? How did he fit in? Where did Nehemiah fit into history? What about Joseph and Mary and the lineage that they had and the chronology that they had? Because a lot of times we just kind of know little bits and pieces of history, but we don't have the context of the Bible. And sorely, we miss huge blessing because all of these people had promises. And when Jesus is born, it's the culmination of all these promises and fulfillments. And even today, prophecies and things are being fulfilled in Scripture. And when we don't have the chronology of that, we miss out. The ancient church practiced the biblical holidays, the feasts and festivals that God had instituted. And he says we'll celebrate again in eternity. And they actually are very important because they teach also kind of a timeline of history. And so when you understand that context, then it makes sense. And when in Scripture, when Jesus is standing in a certain place during a certain festival and he says a certain thing, all of a sudden it makes more sense because in the festival, like when he says, I'm the light of the world, well, there's a light that's present during that festival and he's actually saying, I'm that light. That light was here to represent me. And now there's new context. And so we go through scriptures and we read about different people and different scriptures, and we take these little fragments and we apply them to our life, but we don't understand the bigger picture. And it's the same way with an education. Traditional education is very fractured. It's very piecemeal. And then all of a sudden we graduate students, we want them to succeed in life. They have no idea how to do this. Probably one of my bigger bitternesses in life is that I had to sit through 13 years of school, right? From kindergarten to 12th grade. Ugh. Then I had to go to college, because you go to college. And so we go to college. And then I get a job, and the first day, what do? They hand me a piece of paper and they say, go fax this to the number that's on the paper. And I get to a fax machine and I have no idea how to fax the piece of paper. How embarrassing is that? I've now been through however many years of school, and I don't know how to do the most basic business function that I did for the next 8 years, was faxing proposals and quotes to potential clients. And yet that was important. Then I took, throughout school, I took all the math courses. I asked the questions, why do I need to learn this? I went then to college, and my degree was International Business and Marketing, and I'm learning math, and I'm struggling. And I'm still asking, I don't understand this. I don't understand why I got to learn this. I'm trying really hard to. And I really struggled through it. When I get into the real world, and suddenly my mentor, who is so good, he didn't even take a lot of time. He just was really good at explaining to me, this is how we calculate a lease. It's not a big deal. We need to know principal, we need to know time, I need to know interest. And as long as I have these things, I can calculate a mortgage. Here's the mortgage payment. And if I have any one of those and I'm missing another, I can calculate it backwards. He gave me a fancy calculator, said these are the buttons you need to know, this is how it works. And then from that knowledge, because now then we would get in a car, we'd go and sell to a client, and we would explain the numbers behind the contract, and then after we sold the contract, we would do the installation, and I would have to work to make all the numbers work. The principle was this, to buy this equipment, and we bought this equipment. Now we're collecting this money, this is our profit, this is the client's profit, and from all of that, it began to make huge sense. And then I went on to actually start developing some very creative proposals, because I now had a new concept of, this is why I needed to learn this. This was knowledge, applied knowledge. This was knowledge in context. In all these years of having to learn this other stuff, there's time. We have to learn hard things sometimes. Putting together a car isn't necessarily all easy, right? There's some parts that are going to be more challenging than other parts, and so we have to learn that. And we do have to learn the skills associated with it. But when we approach it from just the pieces, figuring, oh, it all makes sense, build it and they'll come type thing, it all makes sense when they graduate, they'll figure it out. We have to retrain ourselves, as opposed to, let's work from the big picture first and then begin moving forward. Math Lessons for a Living Education is one of the perfect examples for me. It's a Charlotte Mason inspired education. There are stories at the beginning of each lesson. And I often hear people say, well, my kids don't like reading the stories. We don't like the stories. We skip the stories. We do the math. Okay, here's the issue that I would present with that. The stories may be simplistic for your child. Maybe they like to read, more weighty literature. That's fine. But the stories are the application component. They're learning concepts, and they're learning that, oh, this is where we're applying these concepts. One of the best ways to make fractions come alive is, hey, let's begin to go buy a pizza. Tell them don't cut it. And then when they get it, let's figure out, how are we going to split this between the family, right? If we have 9 kids and 18 pizzas, if we all want 2 pieces of pizza, how many pieces do we have to cut this puzzle and this pizza into in order to each have 2 pieces of pizza? What if there were only 2 of us? Well, we would cut it in half. Now we have 2 pieces, right? 2 pieces, 1 pie, there we go, right? We got 1/2. I mean, you see, suddenly the fractions begin to come alive, because now I'm not just looking at this fractured elements, I'm actually starting to break it down and see the pieces of it. And so a lot of what we try to accomplish with Master Books is a much more holistic approach to learning. It's not just studying nouns, verbs, adjectives, pronouns. You know, there's a place for that. But what about the context? Why do we do the picture studies? To engage different parts of the brain and thinking. Why do we not have tests? Math Lessons for a Living Education uses narration back. Why? Because imagine how much has to take place. For me to look at a piece of paper and just say, you know, circle the correct answer. How difficult is that really? Or do the math. I do the math. But for me to actually explain it back to you, that when I take 2 of these and I take 2 of these and I put them together, I have 4. I understand that. I'm not just memorizing something. I'm actually using different parts of the brain to be able to explain that back to you. If you want to grow really fast, or you want your child to grow really fast, have them teach a concept. Right? You stand up in front of the church on Sunday morning and you teach something, I can almost guarantee you will never forget the lesson that you taught, and what you learned to study to prepare for that, you will almost never forget. Teaching is one of the best ways to learn, and that's essentially what we're doing with narration. Is we're asking our students to tell us back, to teach us what they've learned. And when they can do that, then we know that they understand the content and that they've committed it to memory. So, okay. Good. Well, my Facebook comments, I've got a few that came in, but not too many. And I know that I've drilled a lot of information in. So, hopefully this gives a little bit of concept. As you're going through school, if you went to a public school or a traditional school and you did fractured learning, and then, you know, your concept is, as I approach school, I hand my students the books and they're going to do the books, we're done with it, we did school, we did our math, whatever. Try to step back a little bit and realize that the way as an adult we learn, right? If you want me to learn something, you've got to help me understand why it is you want me to learn it. Why is this important to me? And then maybe, like, let's say the car, where I talked about, you know, all the pieces of the car. Imagine if we reversed it from the traditional industrialized formula more to the Charlotte Mason approach. Well, the Charlotte Mason approach would be a little bit more like, okay, we're going to learn to build a car, and in order to do that, we need to know what a car is. So we're going to go out and we're going to check out the car. And we're gonna investigate. You know, this is what the car looks like. Okay, we're gonna talk carburetors. So let's open up the hood. There's the carburetor. The carburetor is connected to the fuel system. It's connected to the engine block. It's, you know, now we can see where in context this carburetor is. Let's experiment a little bit. Let's start the car up. Okay, when we hit the gas, the carburetor opens up. You see the flutter. Do you remember the old days? Now it's all fuel injection. But remember the old days when the flutter would go like this? Dad would get a can of ether or something to spray in there to get, you know, get it started. So you'd spray in the engine starter, and then all of a sudden it'd roar to life, and every time you pumped it, you'd hear the shh, shh as the flap opened up. And sometimes it was a 2-barrel carburetor or a 4-barrel carburetor. And the time that you spent there, and it sat under the air filter, right? It was like the biggest wow when they took the air filter off, and all of a sudden you could hear, you know, the engine in through the carburetor. Well, now we have that understanding. All right, so let's get in the car and let's actually take a ride. Let's go to a mechanic or wherever and explore a different type of carburetor and explore, okay, when I press on the gas is connected to the carburetor opens the fuel powers the motor, and so that's what adjusts the amount of fuel that the engine is getting to burn and to go. And so what we're looking at with the carburetor is the control of fuel. And so we begin, you know, really putting it in context. Now that you've taught the student the context of what they're learning, and they come back and work with the carburetor, they not just understand the pieces of the carburetor and how it goes together, but they also understand the context, the meaning, the purpose that carburetor has in building an engine. And as they grow and develop, they're going to be able to take those pieces and put them together better. Another thing Master Books likes to do is we love to incorporate the creator into all of our work, where creation inspires education. because God had this amazing purpose, and everything He created is very intentional, right? Just like somebody created this mouse, and the intention with this mouse, it had design, it had meaning, it had purpose. And so when we study plants, or we study animals, or we study, life, we study anything, math, we're looking at the intention, the design, the purpose, because we're actually putting in context. How hopeless to study from an evolutionary worldview that says it's all here by time and chance. Why? What difference does it make then? Time and chance can change anything, right? But that's not what we do. We study from a very purposed place in our education, and so that's something that we incorporate into a lot. And why we hear this all the time, but I don't know that I feel that my kids are doing enough work. They're getting it, they understand it, we're having great discussions, but it feels like they should be doing more. And again, that's because by design, we remove the busy work and we work very heavily on these short lessons that are reinforcing and building context as much as possible. And then as we give you those tools, we want you to succeed in making that, bring it to life even more. Use real world examples from your situation, and enjoy as a family really beginning to discover, because you got time. You didn't have to spend hours. Some curriculums, like there are math curriculums where you'll spend an hour with your kids in tears, you're in tears, you've spent all your emotional energy fighting to get 4 pages of long division done. We don't want to do that. We want to free it up so that you can actually focus on making the knowledge that they're learning come to life. So use your time there. And if you finish in 20 minutes, phenomenal. That means even in 10 minutes or 20 minutes, just a little bit of time looking for application, ways we can talk about it. And something that's awesome today that we've never had before is that we can pick up our phones or our computers, and we can look for even more information. We can go so much deeper. I love when our family discovers a new word, and then we go and do a search and see, what was the meaning of the word and how was it used, and all of these different things, because we're continually contextualizing information. It's not just, here's a word, here's the meaning, do a multiple choice or a matching game and pass the test. And there's a place for that, and we know that, and some of our curriculum uses that, but we also try really hard to use variety and to make it so that the brain is having to work different ways, not just all one way. So when we say Charlotte Mason, we're looking at much more of a whole child, a whole experience, contextualizing the knowledge. That's the influence that we would take away from it. Short lessons, the narration, some of those things are part of what we've got. And moving away from the traditional fractured education that you find in most schools. What makes the schools work is when you have a teacher who takes that tool and makes it come alive in their classroom. And so that's the approach that, when you have a teacher-led system, you need good teachers to get good learners, because they're the ones who make it come alive, not the textbooks. And homeschooling, and for the real world, sometimes we are stretched pretty thin with babies and jobs and careers and ministry and homeschooling and everything. And so we try to do our best to give you tools that are easy to use, that make the job simple, right? The right tool for the job. But then also through things like this, giving you tools that will help you understand the concepts of, okay, if I want my child to learn subtraction and addition, we've already got the stories built into Math Lessons for a Living Education. So when they read that, then now I know what they're trying to do. They're not just making them read a story that means nothing. It's actually they're giving them context and application, like if we were building a car and we went and took a ride in the car, same concepts. All right. Hey guys, hope you have a fantastic week. Hope this was helpful to somebody. And we've got some exciting things coming in the month of November. Be looking out for sales and some different deals that'll be available, some great gift ideas. This year, I'll give everybody the warning, we're going to be doing it earlier than later, because carriers have already said they're already maxed. So word to the wise, if you do a lot of online shopping for Christmas, I wouldn't wait until December to do it, because chances are it's going to be a real mess. So we're trying to do everything a little bit earlier this year so that we can get things into your hands a little bit earlier, but we know it's going to be a challenge just because, we were busy in the summer and the carriers were busy then, and the carriers have said, yeah, we're already operating at Christmas levels, so chances are it's just things are going to get backed up. It will be more complicated than the United States election. All right, guys. Hey, have a good one, and God bless your homeschool. God bless you guys. We certainly do appreciate and feel honored to be part of your homeschool journey. We'll talk to you later.